Hello everybody. Welcome back. I'm Professor West, and today we will be creating a fidget spinner. A lot of us have played with fidget spinners. It's just a little round thing. You spin it and it spins for a long time. That one obviously didn't do very long, but this is on an emulator and it's kind of difficult to do. But we're going to use a few new tricks that we haven't used before and a few new tools. And one of them is this slide bar here, so we can adjust the speed. So moving it that way makes it spin faster, and moving it this way would make it spin a lot slower. See, very slow. And we'll do the same for the friction. If we move it all the way this way, then it'll spin and it'll take a long time for it to stop because it's barely slowing down. But if we move it this way, it'll slow down very quickly. So that's going to be what we're doing today. And let's just jump right in and get started. So please go to projects and we'll do a start new project, and I'm going to call this one Fidget Spinner. You can name it anything you want as long as you don't have spaces in the name, but it should always be something meaningful. Anytime I see in my projects fidget spinner, I know that this is a fidget spinner. Whereas project 1 or project 11 or project 99, I don't know what the heck that is. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually do some things on the screen itself. Until now in these tutorials, we've dragged stuff onto the screen and did stuff to those. We haven't really done anything to the screen itself. So we're going to do some stuff to the screen itself first. We're just going to come right over into the align horizontal, and we're going to tell it to center. So everything we put on will be automatically centered across. We're going to do the same thing for vertical. So anything we drag onto the screen, it's going to be in the center, and then we'll be able to adjust it from there. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here to the background color, and we're going to choose a color, any color you want. I'm going to probably choose maybe light blue, the cyan. Why not? That looks fine to me, but you can pick any color you'd like. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do, and I know I move a little fast in these videos, but you can always pause it as you need to, or rewind or whatever. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come over here. I'm going to click on that or actually I'm going to come down to layout and open it, and that'll close the other one. And I'm going to grab some arrangements. I want to grab the horizontal arrangement, the top one here, and I'm going to drag it right onto the screen, and notice it centered it. Then I'm going to grab a second one and I'm going to put it right underneath it, and now the two of them both together are centered. And then I'm going to grab a third one and do the same thing. And centering means that it's the same distance from the left and right, and centering vertical means it's the same distance from the top and the bottom. So all three of these together are the same distance. Okay, so with the first one, I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to come over to the horizontal arrangement. I'm going to center it, and I'm going to do the same for the vertical arrangement. I'm going to center it. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust the height and the width. And for the height, I'm just going to tell it, I'm going to come down to the percent, and I'm going to tell it about 10%, because I want this to be about 10% of the screen. So see how small it is now? And for the width, I'm going to tell it to fill the parent. Anytime you place an object onto another object, the one that you place it on is the parent. So in this case, my screen, I place the horizontal arrangement onto the screen. So my screen is the parent. So when I tell my horizontal arrangement to fill the parent, it's going to attempt to fill as much as it can, all the way, since this is the width, all the way across. If I were to do the height, it would do it all the way except for what else is on there, which we'll do in just a moment. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to come to user interface, and I'm going to grab two labels and drag them into that arrangement. And because I told it to center, they're already centering. And actually, I take that back. I did not need that second label. So I'm just going to come over here to label, and I'm going to hit the delete button. I actually meant to grab a slider. So I'm going to come all the way down to slider, and I'm going to drag it to the right. The slider was the one that I was moving left and right for the speed earlier. So we're going to have one label and one slider. And we're going to do the same thing in the second one. So we're going to grab one label and drag it into there. And we're going to grab a slider and drag it into there. Notice with this one, it didn't automatically take up all the space. That's because we didn't tell it to. So let's go ahead and go to the horizontal arrangement here. We're going to click on it. We're going to tell it to center everything. And then we're going to come down and we're going to tell it the height is going to be 10%. And the width is going to be fill parent, just like the other one. So now these should all be pretty much identical. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to come back into this first one, and we're going to come to this label, and we're just going to come over to where it says text, and we're going to write the word speed. And it doesn't matter if you use caps. I'm using all caps on this one. You don't have to. You do it however you want. And I'm going to come up and I'm going to change the font size to something a little bigger, like maybe 25. I think that looks pretty good. And now I'm going to click on the slider. And see how small it is? It's all the way over at the left. So I'm going to tell it that the max value, the highest value it can have, is going to be 10. And the minimum value, the lowest value it can have, is going to be 1. This is important because that means that if they move it all the way to the left, it's a 1, and if they move it all the way to the right, it'll be a 10. We're going to multiply that times stuff in order to get the speed of our spinner to spin. So we don't want to use too big of numbers, otherwise it would just never end pretty much. The last thing we want to do, or the next thing we want to do, is we want to tell it where to start. So all the way at the left is a 1, all the way at the right is a 10. Where do we want it to start? We want it to start in the middle. So we're going to come to thumb position, and we're going to set that as 5, because that's halfway. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to tell it what color to use. So typically, we associate speed with green. So we're going to come up here where it says color left, and we're going to click on that, and we're going to select a green color. And all that means is if it's all the way to the right, the whole bar is going to be gray. As we move it, all the way to the left. As we move it to the right, the part behind that actually counts is going to be green. So the further we move it, the smaller the gray and the bigger the green will be. Okay? So next thing we're going to do is the same exact stuff for the second label. We're going to click on it and change the name. We're going to call this one friction. Again, it doesn't matter if you capitalize it or not, but it's a good idea to do them the same. And for font size, we're going to tell it 25. So next we're going to click on our slider, and we're going to do all the same stuff that we did to the other one. We're going to change the max value, only this time instead of the max value being 10, it's just going to be 1. And the minimum value is going to be 0.1. That's a period and a 1, or a decimal place and a 1. And then our thumb position, our starting position, is going to be 0.5. This is because we're going to use a smaller equation to slow it down as it's spinning. And we don't want to use the same exact numbers as we do for the speed. We want it to be a much smaller percent. And then we're going to go in for the color left, and we're going to change it. So typically friction is like stopping, so we're going to do a red for the left. And we're going to leave the right side the default grayish color. So as you move it across, let me show you on my little emulator here. Right now it's small. But notice there's a little bit of green on this side and a little bit of gray on that side, a little bit of red and a little bit of red. So we are going to tell it the width next. I want to set up a width for my slider. And I'm going to say 30%, because I want 30% of the width to be my slider. So now my bar is this long. And that's because this whole thing from this side to this side is checked, and then it's going to be a third of that. I'm going to do the same thing to the other one. I'm going to set up my, and let me pull the emulator on before I do that. Notice that it's already changed it, so it's already a lot bigger, and now you can clearly see the red on this side. So now I'm going to click on the speed, and I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to tell it 30% also. And as soon as I do, my emulator updates, and now you can see this much of it for speed. So as I'm grabbing it and I'm sliding, if it's all the way down here, it's at the lowest, and as I get bigger, more green will appear. And the same for the red. The more I drag it, the bigger the red gets. That doesn't do anything at all as far as the program's concerned. It's just something for us because we tend to accept it better like that. We tend to recognize it based on other stuff that we do. So, okay. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to come down to this last arrangement that we put on here. And we're going to tell it the height is 70%. Why did we do that? We have 10% height for this first one, 10% height for this second one, and now 70%. So that's a total of 90%. We did that just so that there'd be a little bit of a gap between each item. And then we're going to tell the width to fill the parent. So it's as wide as it can the screen. Okay, we are almost done with the layout already. So the next thing we need to do is we need to come down to drawing and animation. And we need to click on that. And we're going to have to put a picture of our fidget spinner on here at some point. But to do so, you can't have a picture unless you have a canvas. All images have to be on a canvas. So we're going to come to drawing and animation. We're going to grab a canvas and drag it right onto the screen. And then we're going to come over to the height, and we're going to tell it to fill the parent, so it's as tall as this arrangement is, and the width to fill the parent. Since the arrangement is the parent, this is now as big as that arrangement. And last but not least, we're going to drag our image sprite right on there. Doesn't matter where, because in the code we're going to tell it to center it and all this other stuff. So it doesn't matter where you put it. What does matter is that we go over to the picture and add the picture of it. So you can go to Upload File, choose a file, and then you can go to whatever pictures you want. Here's my fidget spinner, and I'm probably going to use this one, I guess. Doesn't really matter. My picture is so big that it doesn't even fit on the screen. In fact, if it wasn't for this part of the box way up in the corner, I wouldn't even know it's there. So ordinarily what we've done in the past on these programs that I've walked you through is we've went ahead and changed the height and the width of the picture. But we're going to wait, and we're going to do that in the code instead. And I'll show you why in a minute. That lets us make sure that it's centered properly. So this is all for the screen. Let's go into the blocks and let's look at the code. This is where we're going to add all of the code and functionality that we need. So we're going to come over to procedures, and we're going to add a procedure, this very top one. And procedures are very important in programming. Depending on which language you use, sometimes we call them procedures, sometimes we call them functions, sometimes we call them methods, sometimes we call them classes. There's little differences between them, but as a collective whole, they're relatively the same. So I like to say I've never once heard somebody say, do this in a function, and somebody else say, what? You mean in a class or a method? Nobody argues about stuff like that because we all understand. So as long as you understand that this is a procedure, and what it is, it's basically going to be like a miniature program within our program. And the whole point of creating a procedure is, a lot of times in programs, we need to do the same thing more than one time depending on the location of the program. So maybe in one point at this part of the program I need to do something, and maybe at a different one, maybe at this point of the program I need to do the same thing. Well, instead of writing all of the code like 5 times, like here and here and here and here and here, we write it one time and then we just call it each time to run or reference it. So that's all we're doing here. We're going to rename this, and I'm going to call it Load Spinner. To rename it, you just click on the name and start typing. So I just clicked on the name, and I started typing Load Spinner. I'm calling it this because that's meaningful. You always want to have something meaningful. I know anytime this procedure gets called, that it's going to be setting up the screen to load my spinner. So if I have to do that in 12 different places in my program, in every one of them I can just call this Load Spinner function and it'll work. So let's go down to our spinner, which is our Sprite. And let's go down to, before we do that, let's rename this. So click on it, and you could have done this in the designer, but I wanted to do it on this side this time. Let's do rename, and I'm just going to call it spinner. And I'm going to click OK. Okay, it doesn't like that because we already have something that's part of another part of the program, so I'm going to have to call it something else. So let's call it FidgetSpinner. Sometimes you get into these, they call them reserved words, which is words that the program understands already, so you can't name something that. So let's go into the spinner now, or I called it FidgetSpinner. Let's scroll all the way down into the green, and one thing you need to know about these is they always have the name at the left, so it's always FidgetSpinner because I'm on the FidgetSpinner. And so they're always alphabetized by this second item. So here's the E's, H, I. We're going to go down to the rotate. So we're going to go all the way down and find the one that says rotates. And almost every one of these is going to have two. There's going to be one with the word set, and sets are used to say this is what it's going to be. And then the ones without sets, we call them getters. They're the getters and the setters. Getters ask it what it is. So if I was going to use a getter, I would ask it, is this something that's allowed to rotate? But I'm not doing that. I want to tell it that it's something that's allowed to rotate. So I'm going to use a setter. So let's grab the set and drag it right on. And then all I have to do is go to logic and get true and click it in. So now my picture, my spinner, being allowed to rotate is true as soon as this loads. So the next thing I want to do is I want to figure out the spinner's width and height. So let's come back down and let's go to our spinner, and let's come all the way down to the W's, and here's my set fidget spinner width. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this, we have to use a mathematical calculation. So let's come over here to math, and we're going to use the one that has the multiplication sign. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The sixth one has this multiplication sign on it. Let's grab that and just drag it right onto the screen for now. So now I'm going to go back to my spinner, and I'm going to scroll all the way down, and I'm going to find the get for the width. So FidgetSpinner.width, and I'm getting the one without the set. So this is going to ask. Actually, I didn't want the fidget spinner width. I wanted a different one. But check this out. I wanted the canvas width. So I can either go to the canvas and do the same thing, or I can click this little drop down. And, okay, well, it would let me do it for all the tools associated with it, but it won't let me do it for that. So we'll just put this off to the side because we'll use this one in just a minute. So, or you could delete it, either way. So I'm going to go to canvas, and I want the width for the canvas. Sorry about that. I do these a lot, and sometimes they get a little confusing. So we're going to come all the way down to the canvas width, and we're going to find the one that does not have the word set on it, because I don't want to tell it the width of the canvas. I want to get the width of the canvas. I want to ask it. And I'm just going to plug that right in. And then I'm going to need to multiply it times something. So I'm going to come up to math, and I'm going to get the very top one. This is just a number. And I'm going to plug it in, and I'm going to put 0.75. So what I'm telling it now is that when my program runs, it's going to come in and it's going to see how wide this canvas is, and it's going to make my fidget spinner 75% of that width. So I'm just going to plug this right in. So it's going to multiply the two together. Let's say, and this is important because if this is a 4-inch screen, then my fidget spinner would be 3 inches. If this was a 3-inch screen, my fidget spinner would be 2-point-something inches. And the reason this is important is, since people have different size phones, what if somebody's playing on their iPad or their other tablet or whatever, you want this to be as big as it can be without going off the edge. So you either have to know what they're going to be using, or you have to use a formula like this. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set the height. of the fidget spinner. And we can go through this whole process again, or we can right click on set and tell it to duplicate, and it's going to duplicate the entire thing. We don't need the entire thing, so we're going to plug this in and we're going to take the blue part off. We actually don't need any of this, so you can drag it down to the trash can, or you can just click the delete button and tell it yes, delete it. So I'm going to grab this fidget spinner width and plug it right in. So here's why. When the load spinner procedure runs, we're going to tell it that the picture can rotate is true. Then we're going to calculate how wide the screen is and get 75% of that, and that's going to be our fidget spinner width. Now I'm going to change the fidget spinner height, so I'm going to click on this drag down and change that to height. And my fidget spinner height is going to be my fidget spinner width because it's square, so I can do this. If it wasn't a square image, then I would have to recalculate everything. So that's almost it. We only need one more thing. When you look at this picture, you can tell, here's the center of my canvas. This is obviously not centered. It's way off. So we're going to go in, and now we're going to tell it to center that. So we're going to come back down to the fidget spinner. We're going to go into the purple ones. There's only a handful of them. And we're going to get the one that says move to, and then there's an X and a Y here. It's one of the shorter ones. And we're going to drag that right onto the screen. So we're going to tell it to move to, and we're going to give it some coordinates. So to do so, we're going to do something kind of similar to this first one up here. We're going to go to math, and we're going to get a minus sign. One with the minus sign, the fifth one. And now we're going to go back into math, and we're going to get the one with the multiplication sign, the sixth or seventh one right here. And I'll show you why in just a second. Now we're going to right click on the canvas width, and we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to plug it right in. And we're going to come over here to our math, and we're going to get another block, and we're going to put it in, and we're going to put 0.5. Now this is important, and I'll show you why in just a minute, I promise. So we're going to do the same thing for the canvas. So we're going to come back into the math, and we're going to get a multiplication. We're going to plug it in here, or we're going to set it here off to the side, and we're going to come into canvas 1 dot width, or we could right click on the one that's here and tell it, but I'm just going to go into the canvas 1. I'm going to come down to the dot width, and I'm going to get it. And I'm going to tell that, the same as I did the other one, I'm going to tell it 0.5. And in just a second, I'm going to show you why. Now we're going to plug both of these into this minus one. But first, let me show you what we did. This canvas 1 dot width times 0.5 came over here, and it just looked at how wide my screen was. If it's a 4-inch screen, then it says, okay, well, the screen width is 4 inches. And we're going to multiply it times 0.5, which makes it 2 inches. So it makes it the center here. It just tells you where the center of the screen is from left to right. And the second one did the exact same thing to the fidget spinner. So we're going to plug it into this subtract one. And we're going to put the canvas first minus the fidget spinner width. And now we're going to plug that whole thing right here into our X. And let me tell you why we did that. No matter what size our image is, and you know, I'm gonna go ahead and resize it now just so I can show you. I'm gonna make it 250 by 250. Don't do this. I'm just doing this so I can show you. Okay, let's say that the first part calculated where the center of the screen is from left to right. So when I tell it to put a picture there at that spot, it's going to start like that. It's going to start from that spot and go this way. And that's not what I wanted to happen. What I want it to do is figure out how wide this picture is and cut it in half. So there's the center. And I want half of it to be on this side of the center and half of it to be on that side of the center. And that's what I just told it here in the blocks. I told it to find the canvas width and just remember where it's at. Find the fidget spinner width and remember how wide that is, and then subtract it, half of it. So it came here and it says, okay, I'm going to move it this way. I'm going to subtract half of the width, so it's going to start right here, so it'll be in the center this way. And now we need to do the exact same thing for the height. So we're going to right click on this first part of the blue and duplicate it. And we only have to change our fidget spinner height and our canvas height. So now it's going to get the height of the canvas and it's going to subtract the height of the fidget spinner so it can start putting the fidget spinner on. So it's doing the exact same thing we just said. And that is it for this function, this procedure. So anytime I call this procedure, it's going to do all of these things. It's going to tell it that it can rotate. It's going to calculate the width. It's going to calculate the canvas width. It's going to do all this different stuff. Okay, for our next block, we're just going to point to the screen and get the initialize. Screens don't load, they initialize. Buttons load, buttons click, screens initialize. And now we're going to come into our procedure, and when we clicked on procedure a while ago, there was only two choices. Since we've created a procedure here, it's now available for us, so we're just going to drag it right on. Let me see if I can connect the emulator. I'm going to pause this video while it's trying to connect. Okay, my spinner came up. So this is what we've told it now. It was huge, and now we've told it to calculate the size and put it right in the center. And that's what this whole load spinner part did. So now, let's add some more functionality. We're going to come back over to our spinner, and we're going to get the dot flung, the fourth golden one. Dot flung is when you come over here and you spin it. Oh yeah, we haven't added all that functionality yet, so it doesn't know how to do any of that. But that's what it's going to do. When you grab it and spin it, that's going to be the dot flung. So the first thing we need to do is we need to create some variables, because we're going to have to keep track of some stuff now. So let's come over to variables, and let's do initialize global variable. And I'm going to drag it right here because I'm using them right here. Some people like to keep them at the top. In this, it doesn't matter at all. And before I do anything with it, I'm going to right click and duplicate it, and right click and duplicate it again, because I'm actually going to need 3 variables. And now I'm going to rename them all. I'm going to click on the first one, and I'm just going to call it rotation. The second one, I'm going to call it friction. And the third one, I'm going to call it rotation speed. So, rotation will be which direction it's going. Is it going right or is it going left? Friction will be how fast it slows down, and the rotation speed will be how fast it's spinning. I'm going to come back to math, and I'm going to get one of these little number boxes, and I'm going to duplicate it 3 times so that I can give all of these a starting value. I'm just going to plug them all in. And they're all fine except for the friction. Friction should be 0.5 instead of 0. That way we have a little bit of friction starting off. So, next, we need to go and point to rotation and get the set that comes up. When you point to the name, a get and a set comes up. You need to use the set and plug it in. So now we're going to set the rotation speed. Oh, I told you the wrong one first. Oh, it doesn't really matter. We'll do the other. Okay. So now we know we're going to get the rotation. We're going to see if it's heading left or right or whatever. So now, if you look, with the flung, there's already several variables that are part of it, and one of them is heading. So let's come down, let's point to heading, and come down and get the one that says get heading. And we're just going to plug it right in. So now I'm going to scroll up a little bit. So now, when you fling it, the heading is automatically going to know, is it going right, is it going left, is it going up, is it going down? And that's what it's going to assign to our variable called rotation. Next, I need to figure out how fast it's going to be going. So I'm going to point to rotation speed, and I'm going to get the set one. And I'm going to plug it in. The rotation speed is something we're going to have to calculate, so we're going to need a math. We're going to use the one with the multiplication sign, the 6th or 7th one here. And I like to sometimes just set these off to the side to create the formula before plugging it into everything else. So, let's do this. The first thing we need to do is find out how fast it's spinning. So let's point here to where it says speed and use get speed. Then we need to use our speed slider, that's this one here, our slider, and see how far it is. Are they all the way at the low end? Is it all the way at the high end? Because remember, that's going to control our speed. So let's come over here. It was called slider 1. Let's rename that. Let's call that speed slider. And that way it'll have some meaning. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and rename slider 2. We're going to call that one friction slider. That way we don't get them confused later. So then after you rename them, let's go into the speed slider, and we are going to come down and find the thumb position. And we're using the get one, so the one without the word set on it. Set speed slider, or get speed slider thumb position, and we're going to plug it in. So what that's doing is, let me pull this over. If our thumb position is at a 1, then it would multiply a 1 times the speed that you flung it. If it's at 5, then it would multiply 5 times the speed you flung it. If it's at 10, it would multiply 10 times the speed that you flung it. We're just going to plug that right in. And that was actually not supposed to be... How did I do that? That was supposed to be rotation speed. I pointed to the wrong thing for this one, I guess. Let's get off of that. Sorry if I told you wrong. I thought I said get rotation, or set rotation. Sometimes this happens. Rotation speed. That's how fast it's going around. Sometimes that happens. You accidentally grab the wrong one, or you point to one, and then a different one overlaps it. That happens. And we'll plug that right in. So this line should now say set global rotation speed to whatever the speed is times whatever the thumb position is. So we only have one last thing to do. But before we can do it, we have to go back into the designer. Let's come down to sensors, and let's add a clock. Just drag it right onto the screen. Now you won't see the clock. It'll appear down here. It's called non-visible component. And that's because the user won't see the clock that's controlling the behind-the-scenes stuff. So we do that so that it's just out of the way. So come back to the blocks, and now if you scroll all the way down, you'll have a clock here. We're going to go to the clock, and we're going to go all the way down to timer enabled. There's only a handful here. We're going to set clock 1 timer enabled. And we're going to set it to true. Okay, so let's take a look at our timer real quick. I'm going to go back to the design for just a second so I can explain this to you. I'm going to click on the timer, make sure it's selected. Right now, our timer is set for 1,000 milliseconds. So 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second, so 1,001. So when I grab this and I fling it, our clock is going to show the new location every 1 second. So that's going to be huge gaps jumping around. So we're going to change this. We're going to move it down to like 10 milliseconds. So now it would do it 100 times a second. It would update where it's at, which direction it's at. That'll be a whole lot easier, or a whole lot smoother looking. But we could change it back and try it later if you want, just to see. Okay, so now we have told it that when the fidget spinner gets flung, figure out the heading, and that's the rotation. Figure out the rotation speed by multiplying the speed times the thumb position. and set the clock so that it keeps updating. The next thing we need to do is calculate our friction. So let's come over to our friction slider, and let's go up all the way up to position changed. So whenever we fling this, it's just going to sit there and ignore the friction. It's going to get the number, so it's going to know right off the bat that it's 0.5, and it's just going to keep using that until we change it. If I slide it a little bit, it changes, it's automatically going to update it. And that's what we're doing here. We're setting it to automatically update. So what we need is, we need our friction variable. So point up here to friction, and let's do set. And we just need to set it to our friction slide thumb position. So let's point to the friction slider and come down to thumb position in the green, and we're going to get the friction slider thumb position. So whatever, if it's at 0.8, then our new friction is 0.8, and that's going to be used in our calculations to spin the thing and slow it down eventually. Okay, all that's left is for us to write what happens when the clock runs. So every 10 milliseconds, something's going to happen, and we have to tell it what that is. So let's go to the clock and go all the way up to the gold one. There's only one at the top called timer. Okay, so in the clock, we're going to need a few things that we haven't done before. First, we're going to need an if, then, else statement. So come up to control, and the second item is an if, then, else. And let me explain if, then, else's before we actually start using it. I have said before that an if, then statement it's just like when you're talking to your friend. And you say, if you're hungry, then go eat. Same thing. Else is like saying otherwise. If you're hungry, then go eat. Otherwise, go outside and play. So we have a condition here, if you're hungry, if hungry equals true, then do this, otherwise do this. That's what we're going to be doing right now. So to do so, we're going to start off by getting our condition here. And in math, we use this third one here with the equal sign. And I like to have them out here a little bit when I create them. And we're going to come to this drop down. This is equal. So if we could say if hungry equals yes, or whatever. If we're comparing numbers or something like that, we also have these other choices. This is not equals. This is less than or equals, greater than, and greater than or equal. In this case, we want less than or equal. So this one here, the fourth one, we're going to click it. We're going to come up to rotation, and we're going to say get global rotation. We're going to plug it in. So remember, rotation is which direction it's spinning. Which direction did we spin it? And we're going to put a 0 over here. So I'm just going to duplicate this 0 and drag it right on. And I'm going to put this in as my condition. If the rotation is less than or equal to 0, to be less than or equal to 0 means that you pretty much had to pull it straight down. So we have to have all these conditions covered. So next, we need another if-then-else statement. And it's going to plug right into this then statement. So if this condition is met, then we're going to come down and have another condition and some more things that happen if it's true or false. So let's do this exact same thing. Let's copy this blue one and plug it in, only we're going to change it from being less than or equal to being greater than. So we're going to come down to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth choice. So if it was less than or equal, then do this stuff. So now if it's greater than 0, then we're going to do something here. And what are we going to do? Well, first, we're going to set our global rotation speed. So let's find our speed and do a set speed. Set global rotation speed. And we're going to set it to, we're going to have to come to get math. And I understand if some of these mathematical formulas, you're like, why are we doing that? I wouldn't think of that on my own. The more you do these, the more you follow these kind of tutorials, the easier it'll be for you to recognize these on your own. and the need for using them. So the global rotation speed is going to be the global rotation speed minus the friction. So we're going to come back up and we're going to get the global rotation speed minus, and we're going to get the friction. So point to the friction and use the get. And we're just going to plug this right in. So our new rotation speed is whatever the speed was minus the friction. So if the friction is 0.5, then each time it updates, every 10 milliseconds, it's going to subtract 0.5 from the speed. And now we need to set our fidget spinner heading. So let's come back over to our fidget spinner. And let's come all the way down to the set heading. And remember, they're alphabetical order by the right side, so the headings are going to be one of the top ones. Here's the set heading. And we're going to plug it in. We're going to set the heading to, and of course we're going to need another mathematical calculation. Let's come back up and get another minus sign one. We're going to set the heading to whatever the heading is minus the global rotation speed. So we're going to come back up and we're going to find our fidget spinner heading. So come back to fidget spinner. We're going to go back down and get the heading. Remember, the get heading is the one that does not have set. So get the fidget spinner heading minus the global rotation speed. So I'm just going to copy one of these that says global rotation speed, but make sure it says speed. I'm just going to come all the way up. Forget that. We're going to get the global rotation speed, and we're just going to plug it right in. So the last thing that we're going to do for this section is, if this is true, do these things. Otherwise, we're going to come to the clock, and we're going to come down to the green section where it says timer enabled. Set the timer enabled to false. Which means that if the rotation was not above 0, sorry, the rotation speed, this should have been speed. Darn it. It's really easy to mix these up. So this one, change it to speed if you haven't already done so. This one right here where it says if speed is greater than 0. So if the speed is greater than 0, we'll slow the speed down a little. We'll readjust the heading for our spinner. If it's not greater than 0, then we're turning off the clock, which keeps updating everything. So once our spinner hits 0 and it's not moving, we're just going to stop. Okay. Now, we're going to do all of this again. So let's come right here, somewhere in this general area, and right-click and tell it to duplicate. And we're going to plug this into this box down here. And the reason is because there's only a couple little things that we're going to have to change in order to be able to use it. So, this first line here, we don't have to change anything on it. Except for our condition. We're going to come up here and we're going to tell it the global rotation speed. We're going to change that back to rotation. We had to change it to speed over here, but here it just needs to be rotation. And it should be greater than or equal to 0. Then we're going to have our set global rotation speed to get global rotation speed minus the friction. That part needs to be the same. Then we're going to have our fidget spinner heading, and it's going to be our fidget spinner heading plus our rotation speed. And so that means we're going to have to come over to the math and get a plus. Now, why would we need that to be a plus instead of a minus? The simple answer is because it's spinning the other way around. So instead of instead of adding one, instead of subtracting one in order to make it spin this way, we would add one to make it spin this way, or vice versa. I don't know, maybe subtract one that way and add one that way. I can't remember. But anyway, that's it. That is the entire program. So I'm going to pull it up on the fidget spinner. I'm going to pull it up on the app. Okay, so I pulled up my fidget spinner so you can actually see it working now. This is the one we just created. And let's say I want to change the speed up and the friction down. And it just keeps going. And my picture's a little wonky, but that's okay. And it's going to keep going unless I raise the friction. So that's it. That's my fidget spinner. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you find a better picture, it'll look a lot better. So other than that, have fun. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.